back to my channel. Thank you again for all your comments. I will take my time to try and answer again more properly later on. It might take me a little time, but I will get there. So in this video, I found another article I wanted to discuss, entitled "Positive and Differential Diagnosis of Autism in Verbal Women of Typical Intelligence, a Delphi Study," which is published in September of 2021. And I thought this study was interesting because it's looking at the potential difficulty in diagnosing autism in women where the features of autism are not so clear-cut, where a person has self-diagnosed, as you know my opinion of self-diagnosis is very against it, but where a person has self-diagnosed prior to assessment, and where the person is experiencing an acute psychiatric illness. And these factors can all result in a complex situation, which can make it difficult for clinicians to diagnose autism. Even highly experienced clinicians who've had many years of experience can find this difficult. So this study is sort of looking at this issue. And it talks about the importance of being able to make a differential diagnosis, particularly in cases where a non-autistic has strongly self-identified as being on the spectrum. Diagnostic criteria are vague, and this can lead to both under and over diagnosis when applied as a checklist. So that goes back to my other video where I was talking about how we mustn't use the criteria as a checklist, because that can result in people sort of identifying with the criteria when actually autism is way more than just a checklist. It's a qualitative difference. It's not just whether or not a sign is present or not, it's the whole picture of how those signs affect a person's life in multiple different contexts. Because if you take any one symptom of autism, you will find that symptom in non-autistic people. A non-autistic person could even have many features of autism, at least superficially so, but still not be autistic, because when you look at it closer, you realise that it's not a qualitative difference, or the intensity of those traits is not sufficient, or the person is able to function well enough in their life where not to be autism. So that's why it shouldn't be used as a checklist, why people shouldn't self-diagnose themselves or other people. It's very important for autism to be verified, because if it's not verified, you've got no way of being absolutely certain. So it talks here about the clinical participants. Clinical participants in this study, by the way, were clinicians. This was a study interviewing clinicians, people who diagnose autism. So the clinical participants felt that trauma and borderline personality could be difficult to differentiate from autism. They also found that self-identification of autism was frequent, and that it is very important to provide alternative support when they do not diagnose autism. Because part of the problem really is that, particularly as so many people now self-diagnose as autistic, what happens when they go for assessment and they found out they're not autistic? This could result in a severe mental health episode. So it's really important for clinicians to actually be able to offer alternative sources of support and alternative diagnoses. And if they can't do that themselves, they're to refer those people on to someone who can. They shouldn't just give a diagnosis of autism because they're worried about the repercussions of what would happen if that person doesn't get support. They shouldn't fudge for diagnosis evidence, essentially. And by the way, I do know one individual who openly admitted to doing this, fudging obviously I won't say any names, but I know for a fact that this does happen, and it shouldn't happen. Yeah, that is really wrong, because this could potentially mean a give diagnosis of certain people who actually aren't autistic, and that could actually do them actually harm in the long term, particularly if they've got other things going on that aren't being adequately supported. So it says here that the notion of camouflaging as a clinical indicator of autism may lack rigour. This may open up the possibility of identifying any psychological suffering associated with social interaction as autistic camouflaging. For the clinician, this may justify the displacement of the diagnostic threshold up to and including situations where no signs of autism are visible, resulting in a non-falsifiable diagnosis. Because if a diagnosis is just based upon apparent camouflaging, regardless of whether or not that camouflaging is actually evident, you're just going by the person say so. They're camouflaging as symptoms, no signs of autism are present, you don't delve deeper, then how can you possibly, and you diagnose autism, that then can't be falsified because you're not basing it upon any concrete evidence. Like, camouflaging is, it's a wishy-washy concept. It's something that lacks rigour. It can't really be objectively tested. So it's very problematic. So again, a circularity there. The devaluation of the clinical threshold and the less stigmatising nature of autism diagnosis in comparison to some psychiatric conditions such as personality disorders may create a situation of overdiagnosis in adult women of typical intelligence. So again, the article looks into factors of complex assessments. So autism is regarded more positively than most psychiatric diagnoses. It is seen as a social identity which can give access to a community. So I guess that's a big issue, and it talks about the increase in social media and how this is rising to this, how this has given rise to this self-diagnosis culture and people seeking community in an autism diagnosis, even if they're not autistic, because autism is not seen as stigmatising as, say, other psychiatric conditions. I don't know how this has happened. I think the neurodiversity movement is kind of to blame for this. Obviously, no condition should be stigmatising, but it isn't right that that this is happening. Because there are other conditions that a person might have which need to be destigmatised. Personality disorders have been terribly stigmatised. Maybe the name personality disorder should be changed because it's not very nice to be labelled as having a personality disorder. But some people who might be misdiagnosed autistic actually have personality disorders. So the diagnosis assessment should be long and run over more than one session. That's really, really important. Too often assessments are really short, but they should be run over more than one session. That's really important. And ideally more than one person as well. You need a round table really, with several different people to sort of validate it. The person's difficulty should be corroborated by external informant who has known him in childhood, so ideally a parent. I'm just going to move over to video number 2 just in case video doesn't run out of me. I've almost finished, but I'm just going to move over to video number 2 now to carry on with this. So move over to video number 2.